Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Leslie, the Executive Director at VegFund, and welcome to my living room this afternoon, or maybe this evening, wherever you are chiming in from. We're really happy to have you here today. And this webinar, well, it's really a live social. We do some webinars too, but the live social today is part of our activist learning series. And VegFund has tried to be more engaged over the past couple years with bringing new thoughts about skills development for activists to make your outreach more effective. So today we're looking at assessing film viewer behavior change using a survey. So as you can see from the somewhat blurry photo on this slide, VegFund has created a guide to using a film screening survey. And I'll go into that in just a moment. But for those of you who might be new to VegFund, I'm Leslie. I'm the Executive Director. And I'm assisted today by our wonderful Senior Program Officer, Leah Gage. And Leah Gage is going to take you through where you can find the guide and access the survey itself. We'll get to the operations of that in a moment. So again, if you're new to VegFund, you may have hopefully heard of us. Lots of folks have. And what you may have heard is that we do offer grants for vegan and plant-based activism. So we have 3 types of grant applications, one for community events. That really is kind of the heart of where VegFund began in its support of activists globally. Where we offer grants for food sampling or paid to view or film screenings, which is highly relevant to this live social today, as well as our VegFest and other forms of paid outreach. We have an application for our online campaigns, so that's where folks are using videos or perhaps online vegan challenges or other forms of outreach to the non-vegan community to try to convince them to adopt dietary change. And our third type of application are for special projects. It's a little bit of a catch-all. These are for events in which projects and events that are implemented usually over a longer time frame. So that might include new content development, or we've had activists more recently trying to engage with schools to implement plant-based offerings, for example, in school cafeterias, and those projects are of a longer duration. If you have not been a grantee, but you would like to be a grantee, we do encourage you to apply. You'll see the URL at the bottom of the slide, vegfund.org, apply, and you can find that. It's our website. It's on the homepage. So we do have a variety of other events as well. We're quite active in offering a blog, some amazing activist stories of what our activists are doing out there in the world, just really compelling things. I always say that VegFund would not be VegFund without our activists, and it's so true of all the folks who are doing absolutely astounding work around the world to reach into communities and tell them about the benefits to not only animals but humans in the environment of vegan living. And so to help also support activists, we have a pretty profound, if you will, list of resources too that you can access. And as before, you can find these through our website. Apply, well, actually, then there's a drop down for resources. So during the live social, just a few logistics. We'd love if you would chime in and tell us where you're from today. If you're coming from the US, what state, what city, or from another country. And if you want to submit any questions, you could do that actually on Facebook, by Facebook Messenger, in the comment section, whatever way you're finding us today, most likely through Facebook. And if you can tag us, if you're going to share anything, tag us at VegFund, hashtag VegFundLearn, or at VegFund on any of your platforms. So after the live social, if you're willing to take just a few minutes, we're always, interested in what you all think, and encourage you to visit our survey that we'll try to put back up at the end. So vegfund.typeform.com/film evaluation, because we'd love to hear from you. It's important to know that we're hitting the mark of the kind of learning content that we bring to you. So Let me tell you a little bit about why we have developed, go back for a second. Why have we developed this guide to VegFund's film screening survey? So evaluation is always an interest to our activists community, just continually. If you are a grantee, as you've completed your applicant profile, you know that we ask grantees what kinds of skills building activities might they be interested in, or learning events, and evaluation always comes to the top. And so we've decided, we know that the practice of evaluation can be really, really complex, to be honest. It can also be fairly simple, and we have developed this film survey for your viewers, of those who are attending your film screening events. We've created this tool to be a rather simple way to get the input from your viewers about how the content might affect their behavior change. Have they learned something from the film that makes them, think twice about what they're eating? And may the content help gravitate them toward, adopting more plant-based diets, hopefully to go fully vegan. But if not, the survey is to help us see to what degree people might be motivated by the content that they're watching. The survey also includes some demographic information about, hey, who's watching this, where you're from. If you would like to reveal your gender, your age, we're collecting basic demographic information. As well, something that's really important is that we're collecting information about, did people appreciate the event? Did they think it was well organized? Were they able to get into the venue when they got there, or were the doors locked and they were frustrated? And by the time they actually got to the film, they were, kind of in a surly place because they were not able to get into the venue. But we know that most people are really organized, activists are organized, and they're probably, really ready to put on these events. And so the survey is actually 18 questions. I guess you could call it 19 because we have one open-ended possible question at the end of the survey. But again, these 18 questions that are in the survey take a look at the appreciation for how the event was organized, demographics, and then some questions about how did the film or the event potentially motivate behavior change among viewers. So I'm gonna, with Leia's assistance, of course, we'll take a look at how you'll access the guide. But the guide is to help activists use the survey, obviously. And we also, though, give some tips there for organizing successful events, because I think people tend to forget that you, the activists, are a really, really important part, of a very important part of the success of the event. Again, if you show up late, that's, you're not going to be impressing your audience if you start your event late, or if you look really disorganized, or if you don't know the content of the film, or maybe you otherwise haven't planned very well. So it's really critical, for the activists to understand that they are an integral part of any event, and they're going to contribute to the success and really the willingness of someone who is attending to an event to want to complete a survey. If it's an excellent event, they're going to want to help you out to, give them your views about what they thought about the film in your event. So I think we can't really overemphasize how important it is that you, the activist, be really prepared to offer excellent events. And the guide goes into some of those steps, such as, pre-planning, communication, again, knowing the content. Sorry if I'm redundant here. So we encourage you to look at the guide. So after we've taken a look with the assistance of Leia of where you can find the survey tool, where you can find the guide. For those who may want to stay after, I'll be talking a little bit about Evaluation 2.0. We're thinking about doing another webinar, I would say in 2022 at this point, that would take a deeper look at evaluation. And the reason being is that we think the film screening guide is, really super. And it is an effort to try to help activists gather information, about all the wonderful things I said about their ability to organize and plan a great event and the reaction of people to the film content. We know that doing survey work or any evaluation work, I should say, can be, again, very complicated. And so the survey is an attempt to give you some indication about what is happening with your audience to motivate their behavior change. So we'll kind of want to look at the end in my comments of evaluation 2.0, which will follow Leia's show and tell of how to find the guide and the survey. We'll kind of take a look at how you could go deeper instead of just offering this post survey for a film screening, how you could prospectively go deeper. We're not going to go too far today because, again, that would be in another webinar. So where are we? Okay, so let me turn it over to Leia for a moment to tell us about where you can find the survey and how we would get a link to you as an activist, as a grantee, to be able to, get your viewers to complete the survey.
Thanks, Leslie. As an introduction, I'm Leia Gage. I'm the program manager at VegFund. And I want to just tell you a little bit about this survey that Leslie introduced. As many of you who are activists know, and many of you who may not be but are vegans know, one of the main ways that a lot of people are introduced to veganism and may even make the decision to become vegan or adopt more vegan practices is through a film screening. Maybe they saw a film that really impacted them. Maybe a friend brought them. And so we decided that having a survey to really understand the thought process, the motivations, and the planned behaviors after the film screening of each participant. So Leslie, do you mind to stop sharing your screen and then I can share mine? Thank you.
Yep,
awesome.
there you go.
So if you apply for a grant from VegFund and you're approved for a film screening, this means that you can have access to this survey. A lot of activists are doing lots of different types of projects, and this particular survey, as Leslie mentioned, is really focused on film screenings. If you're not hosting film screenings, that's okay. This presentation will still be applicable to you, but really the survey that we're presenting is focused specifically on film screenings. Once your application is approved, VegFund will send a link to a survey that you can share with all of your participants, with your audience members, to take after they've seen the film. So once you receive that link, you'll also receive a QR code and 2 different types of QR codes that you can share. So let me first show you the guide. I'm going to share my screen. So if you're going to vegfund.org, if you come up here to resources, we have lots of different resources, as Leslie mentioned. You would want to click on guides here. And you'll see, first we have how to apply for vegan advocacy grants from VegFund, which if you haven't looked at that and you're not a grantee, I would absolutely recommend that you start here. But let's say you've already received a grant and now you are hosting a film screening. You can download this guide, a guide to VegFund's film screening survey. And as Leslie mentioned, this guide doesn't just touch on the survey itself, it also gives you some really great tips for how to host a great event. So you could click download to download the guide. I already have mine pulled up here. And without going too much into the guide, because we'd love for you to read it and take a look at it, this is basically an introduction to the survey tool, which I'll show you next. We will explain to you how you access the tool. So this, for many of you, hopefully most of you have seen a QR code, especially during the pandemic. So many menus and things are accessed now by QR codes. But this QR code is accessible from any smartphone. You can take your smartphone, you open up your photo app, and you put it over the QR code, and that will automatically take you to a survey. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for you to share this survey with your participants. You will receive 2 different versions of this QR code in the email. One that is kind of smaller, you can put it on a piece of paper and share it as people walk in. You can put it on people's seats so that they see it. There will also be a more high resolution version that you can actually put up on the screen after the film has been completed. And that way you can know that you're going to get a reaction from folks just after they've seen the film. If you're unfamiliar with a QR code, that's no problem. We actually go into some detail about what it is, how to share it, how to use it, and you can always practice with your QR code and your smartphone if you need to. And then again, as Leslie mentioned, we go over a bit about how to host a really stellar event, because that really will make a huge difference in the kinds of survey results that you receive. How to plan your event, how to carry it out, how to engage your strategic communication skills, and then finally how to distribute the actual survey itself, which we talked about a little bit. So like I said, there are two different QR code formats that you'll receive. One is .png, one is .svg, both of which will take you to the survey itself. And hopefully you're able to see that here. And as Leslie mentioned, the survey itself is about 18 questions. If you're hosting an event and you're going to use the survey, we definitely recommend that you go through the survey yourself just to make sure you're familiar with the sorts of questions that are being asked. The first question, very simple, the name of the film that you viewed today. We have a lot of films listed here. If the film that you're screening isn't listed, you can always put other and enter the name of the film there. Then folks will be asked to comment on the value of the content, the satisfaction of the overall experience, types of things that they'd like to see in the future. So we're really looking at the three kind of main buckets of why people go vegan: animal protection, environmental impacts, or health and wellness. Of course, they can always enter other. Then we're going to ask them a little bit about their behaviors. So what changes will you make as a result of viewing the film? This is really going to help us understand what the participants are planning to do as a result of seeing this film that hopefully will motivate them to make some dietary changes. So if they're already vegan, they can enter NA. I already do this. If they're already vegetarian, they can enter that as well. But hopefully we're going to be accessing people who are not quite there yet, who are still thinking about veganism and need to make some dietary changes. So folks can enter all of these responses. Watching the film increased my confidence that I can reduce my consumption of animal products, anywhere from strongly agree to strongly disagree, as well as I already do this. Increasing compassion toward farmed animals. Increasing awareness of cruelty in raising animals for food. Increasing awareness of environmental problems associated with raising animals for food. And human health problems associated with consuming animal products. So all of these questions here are not always going to be relevant to each film. You know, if you're screening Dominion, then maybe we won't really get into some of the human health problems. But if you're screening What the Health, then maybe, you know, it's not going to be as focused on raising animals for food. Either way, we wanted this survey to really be able to be used with any film that you're screening. And that's why all of these different questions are in here. As well as hopefully increased my awareness that it's common for people to reduce consumption of animal products. We thought this was a pretty interesting question, and we're curious to see what the responses are. And then lastly, because we know this is a really important way people decide to adopt veganism, I plan to share information from the film with my family or friends. We're asking folks what their actual diet is. We're asking what their generation is, what their gender is, race and ethnicity, and the country that they live in. And finally, this last question, any feedback. So this is an open-ended question where folks can really give their honest opinion. All of this, as you note, is, as you may see, is anonymous. We don't ask for any contact information. So if you have participants who are concerned about providing their information, we're not asking any of those sorts of questions. We really just want to know, like, what steps do you think you'll take, and how did this film affect you? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. So yeah, that's basically the survey itself. We really hope that folks will use it. We've tried to make it easy for everybody. We've tried to make it also easy for participants to access. In addition to a QR code, I didn't mention this, you'll also receive a link to the survey itself. So if folks aren't comfortable with a QR code, or maybe don't have a smartphone, then they can always access the survey using the link.
Thanks, Leah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just want to, excuse me, add as well, you might wonder, where does the survey
Oh,
data
yes,
go?
sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So the survey data is collected on a platform called SurveyMonkey, which, is a platform that many of you may be familiar with. And what we're doing is we're collecting information for every survey that we receive from your viewers there. And then we're able to, see the data across all these films. And I think as Leah explained, when you apply for a film screening grant, you're going to get a collector code that is unique to you as the film screener. So that way we're able to see how many of your viewers participated in filling out a survey. And we can give that information back to you, because I'm sure, again, activists are always interested in evaluation of their events. So we're able to give that feedback to you of how many of your viewers completed a survey related to your event. So we will have kind of the central database of responses. We have tested the survey previously, so we probably have upwards of, all things considered, probably 350 responses up to the present, but that also includes a pilot test of the survey. And so you can get your information from VegFund. So no worries about that it gets lost. We are holding it in our central database repository. Linda just asked, maybe I missed it, should the viewers view all of the films? Linda, there's a drop down where they will choose which film they are viewing for that particular day with your screening. So they'll get to choose which film. And as Leah said, if the film that you're screening is not there, they can fill in the name of the film in kind of the other box. So your viewer should select the film that they are watching for your particular event. And again, you'll be coded as the activist. There'll be a collector code so that we know to match the response of you, the grantee, with the survey that's coming in. And hopefully you get lots of surveys. And I think, as we all know, just like we've asked you to possibly go to Typeform and review our event today, it just takes literally like 30 seconds to do. But we know people are busy, and sometimes at the end of the event, they're ready to scoot out of the event and go home, or they're, racing home to children or to animals, to pets, what have you. There can be a million reasons why they don't have a lot of time to stick around. We've tried to make this process, quite easy. And I think it's really important that you, as the activist, try to warmly motivate your screeners to please complete the survey, because it helps you to understand your success with the event. And it also helps VegFund to understand the success of film screenings generally, to motivate behavior change. So, you've got to develop a rapport with your audience to try to motivate them, if you will, to complete the survey. And we think a lot of that motivation comes from just putting on a great event. And I'm sure all of you are thinking that way. But this is a very basic tool that is a post-event survey that will give us some indication of the influence of film content on viewer behavior change. And we are sort of running through the information here, but this live social, is being recorded. So if we need to play it back to someone, you should be able to find the content of this live social at a later time. I know we're kind of going in a hurry, but we try to keep these to roughly 45 minutes or so, no longer than an hour. So I'm going to kind of take a scan through some of the questions. Linda asked about which film. We have put in the comment section, the chat, where you can find the guide, as Leah ran through. I think that's really our only question right now from Linda, who is Linda. I'm not sure where you're from.
I think in Zimbabwe.
Oh yeah, Zimbabwe. Excellent. That's wonderful. Yeah, cool. So those are kind of the basics. I mean, again, the reason we wanted to put this survey tool together is we know that you're interested, and evaluation work can be kind of tricky. So when we created the questions as a part of the survey itself, with an evaluation expert, there are a lot of nuances to the words that you choose in the question that you're asking. In many cases, you want to ask questions that are, I'm not going to say they're open-ended in this case, but that really do facilitate collecting information without using words that are off-putting or confusing, or everything that could go wrong with a survey. So we have developed this in collaboration with an evaluation expert. And if we find that this tool is successful, then we're thinking about trying to develop some other survey tools as well with for some of our other programs, potentially some of our mentor challenges, eventually food sampling. We know that the pandemic has put somewhat of a hurt on our food sampling program, but it is coming back. So we're trying to think of other ways to assist our activist community to understand the success of their events through these kinds of tools. So as we pilot this one, if we're successful in grabbing a lot of viewer surveys and we can see, if it's working or not, then we'll look at other tools as well, because it is tricky to put together a good survey. So I just want to say with that, if there no other questions, I'm going to turn to what I'm going to call evaluation 2.0. And I'm just going to have a few comments about what might come in the future as we think about doing some work for you all around understanding evaluation. So let me share my screen again. Oops, get up the right thing. Oop, one sec, getting there. Okay, hopefully we're back to the presentation. So what do I mean by evaluation 2.0? I simply mean it's an opportunity for activists to learn more about the practice of evaluation. So again, Leah alluded to in her comments that the survey that we've put together is rather generic, right? We have a drop-down list of films and we have a list of generic questions around dietary change as motivated by that film. But if you're screening a film that's mostly about human health, it may not really touch too much on animal rights or animal welfare, and therefore you could have questions in the survey that might seem, somewhat irrelevant, if you will, to the particular film that you're screening. And so those are some of the limitations of when you're putting together a generic survey, instead of saying, I want to create a survey or some means of doing evaluation that's very, very specific to the content that I'm offering or to the audience that I'm speaking to. So if we think about evaluation going a little deeper, where we don't have this generic tool, but we're doing something that's more complex, sometimes, often, to be honest with you, organizations will start when they want to do program evaluation with the idea of a theory of change. And that theory of change is saying, if I take some action, if I as an activist decide to do a film screening, I believe that as I reach people with this film, it will convince them to consider new ways of being. So what I'm saying is that the activist believes that by showing people a film, it will convince them prospectively to consider or adopt dietary change. So in that regard, we're saying we end up with the results or a change that we want to see in the world, right? Because we're activists, because we are trying to promote the adoption of vegan living. So a theory of change is saying, if I take this action successfully and I reach people, I will get the change that I want to see. But the components of that, so the activities might be a film screening, they might be food sampling, they might be a vegan or veggie challenge, they might be a veg fest. And with each of these activities, then you obviously would want to change up the questions that you're asking someone who is attending an event. So the survey that we've put in front of you today would be less relevant prospectively if you're doing a food sampling or if you're doing a veg fest. That might require another kind of a survey tool or a different kind of an evaluation method. So, to really understand the effectiveness of the outreach tool that you are using, you theoretically want to think from the start, before you're implementing the event, what kind of outputs and outcomes do you want to see, or do you believe can happen as a result of offering that event with particular content? And if we're to go, kind of a few steps deeper here. See, we're getting deep, right? So apologies if everybody's getting confused, but just remember, you could go back to the recording. And honestly, this is just to say to you all, this is what might come from VegFund if we think there's interest. The other thing that could be interesting, though, as you think about your activity is, how many people do you want to attract in advance? Are you hoping that 100 people will come to your event who are not vegan? Are you trying to target 50 people who will come who are vegan, which is not that interesting to us because, as you know, we're trying to convince non-vegans to be vegan. So if you're going to think in advance about how many people you want to attract, you can see in the end, did I attract 100 people, or did only 3 people come to my screening? And why is that? Is it because it was raining that night? Is it because maybe I didn't communicate very well? I didn't market very well? If you add assumptions to the front as you think about the success of your events, if you add these assumptions up front before you undertake your event, you can see the gap between what you wanted to achieve and perhaps what you wanted to achieve. So maybe you had a target of attracting 100 people, but actually 150 people came. So that would be a real score. But equally, you would still want to consider, wow, what happened? What did I do right to get to 150 people attend when I only expected 100? Then let me just, jump to some of the assumptions. Again, if you're working, for example, with kids, for example, children who are in the 4th grade, and you show them the film Dominion, that might be the wrong film for that age group, right? Because we know it's a very hard-hitting graphic film that might be inappropriate for that age group. So you may not achieve, if you're using that film for that audience, you may not achieve the long-term outcome that you desired. You may not even achieve the output that you hope that you would, because perhaps their parents have found out that you're targeting a very graphic film to young children, and they wouldn't let their kids participate in viewing that film. So you have to think, if you're going deeper into evaluation, about what audience am I speaking to from the beginning, and is it reasonable that they will come to that event, and is the content that I'm creating appropriate for that audience? Is the length of the event appropriate? I mean, can you imagine trying to get a 4th grader to sit still for an hour and a half? That might not be a very good learning channel for them. So as we go deeper into the practice of evaluation, we're considering in advance the demographic that we're seeking to reach, and we're thinking about what is an appropriate way to reach them with what appropriate content, so that we are achieving, the long-term outcomes that we're, trying to measure. So perhaps we would use, I'm trying to think, maybe there's a film called Okja. A lot of the animal rights films, quite frankly, are pretty hard hitting. But Okja, I know, is an animation but perhaps it's more accessible to someone, who's maybe 14 years old or something, in the messaging. And we would be able to see if that film would have an effect on the dietary change considerations of younger groups, as opposed to, like a really graphic film. But again, when you add assumptions to your activism that you consider in advance of your event, you're going to become like more targeted in understanding the effectiveness of your activism. And then you have a greater ability to measure things, right? Hey, I thought 100, how many screenings did I hold? One. How many hours did it take me to do this? 100 hours. Did I ultimately really get the outcomes from that film that justified my spending all this time and the cost to hold the screening and all that? So this data is really, we love this kind of data if we can get it from activists who are attempting evaluation, because it helps us understand the value of our programming. So in this case, it would help us understand the value of supporting film screenings. So again, that's just a kind of a quick overview of what I'm going to call Evaluation 2.0. And this live social today was not intended to go into depth about these ideas, simply to say that we are considering putting together another guide, a secondary guide, and also another webinar, more intense webinar on some of these ideas of theory of change, adding the assumptions and adding measurement to your work. And let me say up front that going to this depth is definitely more complex. It can be more costly because at the end of the day, you may only have access to the person during the duration of the film screening. And once they leave and maybe you didn't know them, you're not able to really necessarily with a quick survey be able to know the effect of your event on the long-term behavior change of that person. So evaluation can be somewhat rather simple, as we've demonstrated with our film screening survey tool, or it can be really complex. And you can do longitudinal studies where you're trying to follow a person for, months, if not years, after your event, to see if your event still has stickiness for their behavior change. But those things are very costly. Evaluation is absolutely its own profession. And, it's probably not for we call them the weekend warrior activists, right? Who are just trying to do good out there in the community. But for anyone who might be interested in learning about these kinds of things, it is something that we're considering if we feel there's enough interest. So I would kind of like to just wrap up by saying thank you for attending today. I saw someone too from the Congo, which is just wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. If you would go to vegfund.typeform.com film evaluation and give us your thoughts for today, we would really, really appreciate that. And again, no panic if there's something that we're rushing through and you want to hear again, because we'll be putting out a recording soon. And I guess, Leah took you through where to find the survey guide. If you're not a grantee, on the homepage is the same place that you apply for a grant, instead of under resources, under grants. And we really, really appreciate your joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Leslie.
I'm going to take one question. Well, there's a few actually. Laura said, what would be appropriate for that age group? I assume she meant younger children. Leah, can you think of some films that might be appropriate for younger audiences?
Definitely.
Okja came to my mind, but
yeah, definitely. Okja is a film that you can screen. We have not actually found a way to obtain a screening license for the film, but it is available on a lot of streaming services, so you could screen it that way. But another great film is The Last Pig. And not only is The Last Pig not a graphic film, it tells a really beautiful story in under 90 minutes, I think, about a pig farmer who decides to become a vegetable farmer. There's no image of slaughter or anything, but also that team at The Last Pig has created a shorter version that's really good for students. And they have versions for middle school students, for elementary school students. So that's a really great resource, I think, for that age group.
Great. Good. Yeah, good suggestion. Also, Kay asked that she has screened events at AMC theaters. Should we pick the space first so we know how many people in advance we can fit? Absolutely. That's a great idea. So you want to select a venue that you think is appropriate to your outreach efforts, so that you don't get a venue that's too big and you don't get a venue that's too small. Because honestly, think about it. If you have a venue that's too large, and you go to a movie and you're like 3 people sitting in the movie, that's not very compelling. You want to feel in your activism that you're sitting among a group of really interested people. So that's the kind of a thing that can affect someone's willingness to complete a survey, that they go to an event and say, whoa, 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 I'm in a place that's way too large for the audience. It's not cozy enough for what the content and all this is about. So I think that's right, Kay. You want to think in advance about, what is the extent of my outreach? What do I think will be the success of getting people to come to my event, and then select a venue accordingly.
Right. An AMC theater might not always be the right choice. If you think it's going to be a small community event, there are usually some great options. We have folks using libraries and community centers while they might not feel as professional as a real theater, it can actually make for a really nice event.
Yep, absolutely.
And yeah, I see you commented that you live in New York. You never know. That's true. And we've definitely supported events that were quite large. So, being able to assess your own ability, as Leslie mentioned, being able to think about how much time do I have to put into this? Getting people to come out to things is difficult. And so if you think you can get 500 people out and you need a 500 person venue, then that might be the right place for you. But if it's not, that's okay. That's not necessarily what we're trying to target in every case with a film screening.
Laura says, please come to Melrose, Florida and volunteer for the Ruderville Farm Sanctuary. So anyone going to Florida wants to volunteer, contact Laura Aaron from Ruderville. And actually also chimed in, I think, from the Congo, which is wonderful. Said what to do in order to introduce it into our project. I think maybe he meant film screenings. So also, if that's the essence of your question, you would just go to vegfund.org, apply for a film screening grant. And that should help you include awareness about environmental education. Speaking of environmental education, so Cowspiracy is always kind of a winning film in environmental education. It's also, it's somewhat US centric, and that they focus a lot on, feedlots that are a standard model in the United States for feeding cattle. But there's a lot of good environmental messages there. What other films do we have that may have an environmental direction?
Well, Seaspiracy, I think definitely does. Of course, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
But we do have a listing or screenings on our website, so you can find those of films that are often screened. And if you have other ideas for other films, you're welcome to recommend those to VegFund, and we would absolutely give it consideration.
Yeah. I see one other question here that I want to pull up, just because I think it's a really good one. At what stage should we apply for the grant? This is a good question because, of course, we're asking you to do all this planning, but then VegFund also, will provide funding. So VegFund will provide funding for a screening license. We'll cover costs of the venue. We may cover costs of marketing and some food samples, all within reason. Definitely do take a look at our guidelines before applying for a grant. But as far as making sure that you get a grant request in time, VegFund definitely encourages folks to put about a 4-week or 1 month lead time for applying for a grant. So that means you should expect to hear back from VegFund within 4 weeks. So that doesn't necessarily mean apply 4 weeks before your event, because you'd like to know probably whether or not you got the grant more than just the day of your event. So definitely do provide lead time. But if your event is rolling, if you think, okay, well, I have my venue set, I know which film I want to screen, and I think I can get the license, then that's the point at which you want to apply for a grant from VegFund. The event should be in process. You don't necessarily need to have it all planned out at this point, but definitely knowing which film you're screening, knowing how to obtain the license, and knowing where you're planning to screen the film, I think if you have those 3 pieces, that's a good point at which to apply for a grant.
Thanks, Leah.
For sure. And yes, we see some great, so it looks like our team member Patrick put a link in here for our list of recommended films to screen. So yes, please do check those out. Yeah, and we also have a comment here from Laura. The Game Changers DVD can be purchased and given to school physical education teachers and coaches everywhere. Yep, that's right. The DVD can be purchased. They actually have the Game Changers has their own screening guide as well. That's really great. And they actually prefer that you go through them directly for screening the film. So I definitely, if you're interested in screening the Game Changers, to reach out to them directly.
Yeah, sometimes we have limitations, and we work with the producers and distributors of these films, the best that we can. So, yeah, some prefer to keep it in-house, which we completely understand. But it's available. Game Changers. It's a great film. So if there are no other questions, we really thank everyone for tuning in today, and do apply for a film screening grant at vegfund.org. And equally importantly, please download our new resource and take a look and let us know if you have any questions. It's actually fairly short. I think it's about 8 pages long, so it's a pretty quick read. And so we thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for completing our evaluation survey as well, if you can.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.